this thing after trying this 2 different times. Yes, all right. This is exciting. We are live after our technical difficulties last week. We are now live on Facebook and getting ready to go live on Instagram with all our gang here. And look at that. We are in business this week. That was so awful last week, and I really appreciated everyone's patience with me as we worked through our difficulties. I'm very, very, very excited for the guests that I have. And speaking of difficulties, sadly, we're going to have Ed McDonald with us by voice and his partner in crime. Oh, I shouldn't use that word. And Jake Brown. They've written a fabulous book together, and they both are so impressive. It's going to take me a while just to get through all their credentials, you guys. So hi, everybody who's here. I see Kathy has come in. North Idaho is here. Phoenix has arrived. Very, very fun. And that's where it just said that Edward had entered the studio. You dirty thing. Anyway, you guys know what terrible times we had last week, but everything is a go now. And I'm going to get right to it, ladies, because these men have a lot to share. This is not your usual girly girl talk, because we have got a celebrated lawyer who took down the mafia. And we have got an amazing writer who has interviewed everybody from, well, I'm going to just tell you right now. We're going to start with Jake Brown. He's such a cool guy. And he's an award-winning biographer. And he also hosts a TV show called About the Authors. He's written 60 published books since 2001. He's been busy. He's been published in 11 countries around the world. And these include bestsellers, collaborations, co-written with rock music's biggest legends. I'm going to list some of these names, you guys. Oh, I was just in awe. He has done things, written things with Rock and Roll Hall of Fame inductees Heart. Oh, when I saw that, oh my gosh, Jake, I loved that band. I'm like, oh my gosh, and you got to work with them. That is so cool.
Everybody loves Heart. Gotta love Anna Nancy. Yeah.
What's not to love about Heart? Oh man, they're amazing. He's also, though, collaborated with Merle Haggard and with the Smashing Pumpkins frontman. Oh, my kids would be in awe. They loved Smashing Pumpkins. And he's written, so all these people. He's also written the critically acclaimed Nashville songwriter, Songs of Nashville, which I am asking for Christmas, because I am such a Nashville girl, and that was what I wanted to do before I became a writer. So I'm really jealous of Jake, because he gets to be around all of that. So he's done that. He is he's done in the studio series, written that. And he's written, which we're going to be talking about here in just a minute with the amazing Edward McDonald. He has written the forthcoming Chasing Goodfellas. And you're going to be a dazzled amaze when I get to Edward's credentials to it here in just a minute. Jake's extensive TV work includes presently airing series like Music's Greatest Mysteries on AXS TV, Breaking the Band on Reels Network, BETS's Bets, smash hit The Death Row Chronicles, Bloomberg Network, and Fuse TV, among, that's just to list a few. So he has just done all kinds of things. He's a creator, host, producer of the first of its kind streaming television show About the Authors TV, which I actually got to be on with him at one point. It was so fun. Anyway, he's done his work. He's received international press and CBS News, The Village Voice, Hollywood Reporter, Rolling Stone, USA Today, MTV.com, Billboard Parade, Country Music, oh good grief, Variety, Forbes. You know what? If you weren't so nice, I really would have to be very, very jealous of you, because it's amazing. Plus, he's won awards. He won the Association for Recorded Sound Collections Awards in the category of Excellence in Historical Recorded Sound Research. You have done so much. Oh my gosh. And now we move on to Edward, who I wish you guys could be able to see him, but we almost made the technology work. At least we're halfway there. So Edward is actually a folk hero in law enforcement, thanks to taking down the mafia in not one but two huge cases. And one, this is so cool. You know what? I love shows about crooks and robbers. I really wouldn't want to have an encounter with one, but I always find those fascinating. And he took down, there was a $6 million heist of cash and jewels in the Lufthansa cargo building at JFK Airport. And it was planned by, you guys are going to love this thing, Jimmy the Gent. It was a mafia guy. I mean, that just sounds like something out of like an old movie, Jimmy the Gent. And this is very interesting. We're going to talk about this later, Edward. Jimmy had a way of making sure that people wouldn't testify against him because he just unalived them. So I'm going, I can't believe you took on these guys. What were you thinking? So while investigating that, he gets wind of more mob action, which involved points shaving in college basketball. And there's a whole nother big scandal and huge case where he put on his Superman cape and took down guys. And so if that wasn't enough, then he gets asked to play a role in the movie Goodfellas. And he played himself. Oh man, so we're going to have a lot to talk about with these men. So let's get started. And I'm going to start just for a minute here with Edward, because, Edward, I got to say, everybody likes to make jokes about lawyers and how, not usually very nice ones, but lawyers are such an important part of the system because you're the ones that put away the bad guys and help protect the rest of us from them. So it's not an easy career path. I don't think I could have ever passed the bar. I don't think I would have even gotten accepted in law school. So what made you choose this career? I'm curious to know what set you on the path to become a lawyer?
There was nothing magical. I was in my senior year of college, and I didn't know what I was going to do. When I graduated, I assumed that I was going to be drafted and go to Vietnam, but that wasn't going to happen for a little while, so I had to figure out what I was going to do the following year after graduation. And most of my college friends were applying to law school. And I said, well, why not? Why don't I do it? I really didn't have much of an idea about what lawyers did, except watch Perry Mason and some of the TV shows. Mm-hmm. And so I took the exam, and I applied to several law schools, and I got admitted to Georgetown in Washington, D.C., which is quite a good law school. I was fortunate, and I went. And it's a long story, but I did not get drafted, and I was able to graduate from law school in 3 years, and I clerked for a federal judge. When lawyers graduate from law school, when students graduate from law school, many of them aspire to become litigators, to go into court and try cases. I thought that looked kind of interesting. And I got a clerkship with a federal judge in Brooklyn, my hometown. And I became quite interested in prosecution, and in particular, organized crime cases and public corruption cases. And that's what I was inspired to do. So I didn't have any burning desire to be a lawyer as a child, and people have their children of lawyers, or their nephews of lawyers, or nieces of lawyers, and they get the bug because they saw what happened in their family. I didn't have anything like that. I frankly didn't have a clue. I was just going to law school to sort of just go with the flow, and so that's how I ended up becoming a prosecutor, and becoming a lawyer, and then becoming a prosecutor. And I was a prosecutor from 1972 until 1989. And in 1989, as my friend Henry Hill, who was the subject of the movie Goodfellas, used to say, I went bad. So I became a lawyer in private practice, and I've conducted a sort of large-scale criminal practice at a large law firm in New York City for the last 35 years.
Wow, that's quite the flow.
The book is not about that. The book is actually about two cases early in my career as a federal prosecutor. It's a funny story. When Jake and I got together to write the book, I got really sort of carried away, I think. And when we got an agent, and the agent got us a book contract, and we had our first session with our editor. She hadn't seen the book yet, but she just said, how many words is the book? And I says, well, I have 2 chapters to go, but right now I'm at 320,000 words. And she says,
holy moly!
And I don't know whether your listeners or your readers know about this, but most nonfiction books are about 100,000 words or 120,000 words, and the book of over 300,000 words was just not going to be acceptable. So the publishing company said, "Look, you're going to have to edit it." And so when our agent got back to us and said it has to be edited, I says, "Well, I thought about it overnight, and I've already edited it. What we're going to do is we've written 3 books. And so what is coming out on October 13th with Chasing Goodfellas is the first of 3 books. And this is about two landmark cases in the early stages of my federal prosecutor's career, the Boston College point shaving case and the Lufthansa robbery case. And I think they're very, very interesting cases. They were landmark cases, and they captured the attention of the public back in the early 1980s. They're timeless stories and filled with characters and intrigue and action and murder and mayhem and tragedy and a lot of humor. And it was fun telling the stories, and I hope that a lot of people get a lot of enjoyment out of reading them.
Oh, I know they will. I mean, I know I can hardly wait to read it. It's just so amazing. So that brings me to a question I had for you. Here you are. Oh, by the way, hi everybody who's come. I'm sorry I haven't taken time to say hi to you all, but as you can tell, I'm busy talking with two very fascinating gentlemen, and so forgive me if I'm not paying attention to you girls. And you can try and ring in with questions. I'll try and monitor that as I'm talking to the guys. But I want to know. I mean, okay, so for those of you who came in a little late, one of those cases. I mean, these are all like big mafia families, and he's prosecuting these guys. And the one, Jimmy the Gent, if you were going to testify him, you probably would not be walking the earth. So I want to know, Edward, were you ever afraid for your life? I mean, they could have easily come after you and bumped you off, right?
Well, they could have, but we kind of, I think we deluded ourselves, my colleagues in the Justice Department and I, and even the FBI agents we worked with and the New York City detectives we worked with, we more or less understood that there was a pact with the mafia, and that as long as we did not go after them in an unfair way, I mean, if we played by the rules and we got them clean, that they were not going to come after us. And we convinced ourselves that that was the case. And we weren't going to bend the rules. We weren't going to take the chance. We just didn't want to do it. That wasn't the way we were made. That wasn't the way we practiced law. And so that wasn't going to happen. But in addition, we also knew that at the end of the day, that if the bad guys, if the mafia people and their associates began to use violence against prosecutors and agents and their family members, or even begin to threaten them, that there are a lot more cops and agents on the streets of New York City that are our organized crime figures, and they would be outnumbered. And if shooting started, they would be demolished. They would be annihilated by law enforcement. So it never got to that point. And so we were pretty comfortable that we weren't going to be the victims of the wrath of organized crime. I was threatened on two occasions, but those threats were put to rest very quickly. The FBI went out and spoke to leaders of in the family that was responsible, and of course the leaders said, "We really don't know anything. We don't have any idea what you're talking about." And then 2 days later, the FBI would get a phone call from one of the organized crime figures and say, "I'd like to meet with the agent," and the agent would go out and meet with him, and he'd say, "Look, we really don't know what you're talking about, but you don't have anything to worry about." And so that was a pretty good signal that nothing was going to happen. So I never was really concerned about my welfare and the welfare of my wife and children. And in hindsight, it could have been foolish, but nobody I worked with, nobody, one of the federal prosecutors in New York at the time that I was working in Brooklyn, and the federal prosecutor in Manhattan was Rudolph Giuliani, who went on to greater things as a politician. And he made much of the fact when he was running for office that he was victimized and that he had many threats against him. And frankly, I think that's a lot of hogwash. There was nothing that was ever meaningful. He just tried to exploit it for his own political reasons.
Well, gee, what a surprise. So I want to circle back again to how you and Jake got together. So you had this book idea. So did you meet each other first and then get the agent, or did you have an agent, Edward, and he said, "Hey, I know this really cool guy who's a writer"? How did you two get together as writers?
Well, why don't I let Jake tell that story?
Okay, Jake, I'm all
ears. It's part of the serendipitous journey of being a biographer, because I saw Goodfellas when I was 13, and we had an organized crime element to our family story. My grandfather was murdered in the 50s by the St. Louis sort of contingent of the syndicate out of Chicago, and it was unsolved, front page story for months, and et cetera. And so, my father grew up without his father. We grew up without our grandfather. And there was just always kind of this strange fascination with the mafia. But in the 80s, you really only had, you had Godfather. There wasn't really, TV shows were goofy, wise guys, kind of jokes. And then they made Goodfellas. And Goodfellas was like the first movie that I actually saw through the lens, which I think Ed would attest they intended to tell it, of the daily workabee mafia associate, within a crew. And I was captivated throughout this whole movie. And then it got to this point where I saw this very commanding presence of a prosecutor. I said, boy, who's that actor? That we've not seen him before. And I think as it filtered into pop culture, throughout the late, 89, 90, 91, it became known that this was actually the guy who was at the head of the federal strike force that took down many of these families. And back then, your research was relegated to newspaper stories. And I was quite a fan of watching these later night things like Nightline or Rivera Live in the later 90s. Ed would then appear on a lot of these shows, the morning shows, and talk about these cases. And so anyway, jump ahead to 2022. And out of the blue, I just thought, I've been writing with rock bands for 20 years and rappers and R&B stars and love their music as I do. Confessionally, I was just kind of getting creatively suffocating. And I thought, I want to tell a different type of story here. So I cold called him.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And then he thankfully called me back. And at first, and Ed can correct me if I'm wrong, but at first he said, obviously you've got a pretty elaborate publishing catalog, but you write with rock bands. And I don't know that this would be like a fit because I'm an attorney. And I said, that's exactly why I think it would be a fit, because I see this, and I think, and this is Ed's vision, even before I can't take credit for this, but we collectively started talking about it, and both were of the same headspace that we didn't want this to be a stiff, boring, sort of one-dimensional kind of law enforcement story where there was no flavor or color or perspective on what it was like to, as an example, flip a mafia witness, put them in witness protection, be responsible for them once they're in suburbia. My Blue Haven, as an example, parodies Ed's actual real life.
I love that movie.
So part of the story are the trials, but the other part is this very one of a kind post Goodfellas relationship. Goodfellas ends when Henry goes into witness protection. You get no insight into what his life was like other than through his point of view. But Ed takes you inside and I'll pass the baton back to him, but inside all of this aftermath that's very unique to their relationship. And with over 2 billion streams and counting, everybody on earth knows who Henry Hill is, but you don't really know who he is from this perspective. And then beyond that, it's very unique that he would play himself in a film that never happened again, other than Fred Thompson doing it in the Watergate series or movie. It never really had happened. And anyway, so it was just, there was so many fascinating aspects going around. And 3 years later, we had 1,100 pages and 3 books. And our agent, Frank Wyman, got us a publishing contract, and here we are. But it's just a one-of-a-kind story that I'm very lucky to have been involved in at all in telling, because I'm keenly aware there are a lot of great writers, even writers Ed knows in New York, who he could have signed up with. So I was just honored to be involved in it.
Oh, I love that one. Obviously, you picked a good guy, Edward. Ladies, by the way, I see some of you are having technical difficulties. I feel your pain because I was there last week. And if you do have questions, go ahead and post them. I will try and keep my eyes peeled. But meanwhile, I will be asking questions on behalf of all of us. I want to switch to, it's pretty cool that you got to be in this movie, Goodfellas, which is a classic movie, a Martin Scorsese film. And how did that, did he just call you out of the blue and say, hey, Edward, want to be a star? How did that work?
No, well, that didn't happen that way. So what happened was the Goodfellas is based on a book called Wise Guy that a prominent New York crime writer named Nick Pileggi wrote in the mid-1980s. And Martin Scorsese was captivated by the script, by the book, and arranged to work with Pileggi to write the screenplay of the movie. And that was probably around 1986 or so that they decided to do that. But because of the work schedules that they had, it wasn't until 1989 that they started to shoot the movie. And when they did, I knew Pileggi because he covered many of the cases throughout the 80s, even the late 70s that we were involved in. And I got to know him, and of course, he was doing the story about Henry Hill. It was sort of the biography of Henry Hill, and I talked to him about that while he was writing the book, and so I got to know Pileggi quite well, and he called me up and said they had a staff person who wanted to take photographs of my office because it was going to be a scene when Henry Hill and his wife Karen were going into the witness protection program, and they couldn't make up their minds about whether they wanted to cooperate, whether they wanted to go into the program, and it was going to be a scene in my office, and they wanted to take my office, and they wanted to send the staff person down to take pictures of my office, and they did. And a woman came down, a young woman, and she said, well, can I take your diplomas, and can I take the pictures of your family? Can I do this? And I says, I talked to her for about an hour about how the scene went down, and she was taking notes. And as a joke, I said to her, look, you're taking my pictures, you're taking my diplomas, you're asking me all these questions. Who's playing me in the movie? And she says, well, we haven't cast the part yet. And in the book, I had a much bigger part in the book, and they were talking about big name actors to play me in the movie. People were just speculating who it was going to be, but it turned out that my part was not quite as big as it was in the book. And she said, we haven't cast your part yet. And I said, well, I'll do it. It just, as a joke. It was just a flippant, statement. I've never acted in my life, and I just was kidding around with her. And I guess she didn't realize I was kidding, because an hour later, I get a phone call from Pileggi, and he's sitting with Marty Scorsese. And they said, here with Marty, and Marty's really intrigued by the whole concept of cinema verite, and the idea that you would get to play yourself in the movie, in this scene, and in a courtroom scene, that really intrigues him. Would you like to have a screen test? I says, I never acted. I don't know how to act. Don't be ridiculous. So he says, you got the gift of gab. Why don't you come in and take the screen test? So I did. They sent me this, what they call sides. It's sort of a concept, sort of like a script. And I went over to Warner Brothers in Midtown Manhattan, and I read for the part. They had two actors who were playing people who were supposed to be Henry and his wife. They weren't. They weren't Lorraine Bracco and Ray Liotta, but there were just two people who were filling in. And I was terrible with the script that they gave me. So Scorsese ripped the script up and said, "Just talk to them like you did in real life. You two make believe you're a gangster and his wife, and you're contemplating going into the program." And so we started going back and forth for about 20 minutes, and the woman was, she was arguing with me, and I was yelling at her, and the guy was yelling at me. And Scorsese says, "This is great," and it was all extemporaneous. It was just ad-lib. And so he says, "I'll get back to you." In an hour, I go back to my office, and an hour and a half later, they called me and said, "You got the part." And a month later, 6 weeks later, I was appearing in a set in Queens that was supposed to be my office, and there were pictures of my children, and my diplomas were up on the wall. And
of your real children?
Pardon me?
Of your real children were on the wall in the movie?
That's actually a funny scene in the Ed, tell her that story.
Actually, oh my gosh.
Sheila, this is a funny story actually from the set about his kids.
So what happens is I have three sons, and at the time they were probably in their early teens. The youngest was probably 10. They probably 10, 13, 14. But I had a picture of them from when they were toddlers. They were little ones. Mm-hmm. And so they took that picture, and when we show up on the set, Lorraine Bracco was sitting on a couch, and Ray Liotta was sitting across from her, sitting right next to her. And there's an end table on which they have the photograph of my three sons as toddlers. And so when we're getting ready to shoot the scene, she's being very hostile. She's acting hostilely towards me. I spoke to her the day before for hours, trying to explain to her what had actually happened in real life, because we were sort of replicating this scene in real life in which they were meeting with. She was meeting me for the first time, and so we're just sort of sitting there. She's sort of hostile, waiting for the action to start, and she takes her coffee cup and she puts it in front of the picture of the kids. Now I'm thinking, well, wait a minute, if the scene gets shot, there's going to be a coffee cup in front of the picture. So I stand up and I stretch, and I'm making believe that my back is bothering me. And I go, "Oh, my back." And I take a couple of steps, and I walk to where she's seated, and I take the coffee cup and I put it behind the picture, the photograph. And she says, "What the hell?" She didn't say hell. She says, "What the?" And
what do you know what?
because Scorsese comes out of nowhere and says, Lorraine, don't worry. Ed just doesn't want to deprive his children of immortality. And sure enough, when the scene is shot, the photographs there, and then of course the kids all go off to college years later, and they tell everybody all these kids in college, they all want to watch Goodfellas when they're at school, and their classmates are saying, "Yeah, watch Goodfellas tonight in the dorm," and my kids go, "Oh yeah, well we're in it. I'm in that movie with my brothers." They're telling them, "So what are you talking about? You'll see." And of course they get to that scene and they say, "That's my father, and that's the picture of the three of us."
Oh
So
my
in
God.
the book, we actually have a picture. That picture of the three boys is in the book.
That is so funny. Well, because that's so different from nowadays, because nobody wants their kids' faces anywhere, on social. But I keep forgetting that was a different era, and of course, it'd be fun to have the kids in the picture. I want to know about the actors. What did you think of some of the different actors that you worked with? Was it fun working with? I mean, Ray Liotta. Gosh, I always thought he was really cool. So what was it
I'm
like
sorry,
working with some of
I
these guys?
just missed that. I missed the last part.
Working
when
with
you
the
said-
actors on the set, what was
Yeah,
it like
yeah.
between Ray Liotta, Robert De Niro, and some of those interactions?
Yeah, well, I had that was in two scenes. The first scene was the scene with me and seated alone with Ray Liotta and Lorraine Bracco. Ray, of course, was Henry Hill, and his wife was Karen Hill, was played by Lorraine. And there was no script. Again, we just the most of the movie. The only script in the movie is when there's a narrative given by Ray Liotta reads from the book and sort of describes what's going on to sort of lead up to certain scenes. But when the scenes are played out, the actors didn't have scripts. That's the way Scorsese works in most of his movies. So he would give us, we did 6 takes of the scene in my office. Each take was from about 20 minutes to 30 minutes. And we did it 6 times. And then in between the takes, Scorsese would say, "All right, now this time, Ed, you be very docile. And Lorraine, you go after him and you yell at him, and Ed, you be meek." And the next scene, he'd say, "Ed," and this is pretty much how the scene that's in the movie plays out. "Ed, you'd be like, hey, look, I don't give a damn about you. All I care about is him. Don't give me your nonsense." And actually, I utter the lines. I don't know how they ever came out, but the line I uttered was, "Look, Karen, don't give me the Babe in the Woods routine." I heard those. I heard your conversations. We had wiretaps. So I heard you talking about cocaine, and I don't care whether you went to the point. So I get this, and that's he coached us, directed us to sort of play it that way. And that's how the scene came out. Lorraine was very cold to me. And after about the third take, we take a break, and she comes over to me, and she puts her arms around me, and she hugs me, and she says, "Listen, I'm really sorry. I'm such a jerk, but I had to get in character, and I really hated you." But she says, "Now I can do it. Now that they've done it 3 times, we can just keep going." But so she couldn't have been any nicer. And Ray Liotta was great. We really hit it off. We had I spent that it was actually about 5 or 6 hours I spent with him the first day. The second day, we had the courtroom scene where I had Ray on the witness stand for hours. We must have been in the courtroom for probably about 17 hours because we had to do voiceovers in the evening. So it was an incredibly long day, and there were just some really some great compelling moments in the whole process. One thing that comes to mind was when I walked into the set at the state courthouse where they had rented one of the courtrooms for the day for the movie. I had an assistant. Every time if you have a speaking role in a movie, they assign you an assistant for the days that you're being filmed. My assistant was Henry Hill's daughter. Henry had pulled some strings.
Oh my gosh.
And she was actually working, on the set, helping out, and she was assigned to be my PA, my production assistant. And so I had seen her the day before in Queens, and then this day we're in the courtroom, and there was another lawyer who was playing the defense lawyer, playing Robert De Niro played Jimmy Burke, and when he heard I was playing myself, he says, "Well, why don't I get my buddy, who's a criminal defense lawyer, to play Jimmy Burke's lawyer, to play Robert De Niro's lawyer in the movie?" So I knew this lawyer, and so he comes walking in. It's around 7:30 in the morning, and he starts saying, "Hey, you got to give me some cross-examination material for this." And he starts using profanity about what a lowlife Henry Hill is. And I said, "Hold on a second," and I grabbed grab him and I put my arm around him and I say, "You're not going to believe this, but these two people here, my production assistant is Henry Hill's daughter, and the young man who was with her came to see me because I haven't seen him since the day I put him in the Witness Protection Program 10 years ago. It was Henry's son." And he goes, "Oh my God." And he says, "I'm so sorry." He says to the kids, and I go, "Don't worry about it. We know what our father is." And,
yeah, we all know he was a low life. Oh my gosh, that's just amazing.
It was funny. So, but Ray Liotta turned out to be a terrific guy. We had, we both big basketball fans. He played high school basketball, he in New Jersey, I in New York City, and we had a lot in common, and we had a lot of time to kill during the scenes. We were together for, as I said, for like about 16 hours that day, and he was terrific. And that evening, we actually went to dinner with De Niro in between before I went back for the voiceovers, and he was very, very quiet and very, I would say, shy. And
really?
He kept, he was not really outgoing, but it wasn't like he was, playing a hot shot or trying to, act as if he was a wholly, more important than I was or anything like that. He was just a very quiet guy, and he just kept saying to me, "I can't believe you get to play yourself in a movie. It must be unbelievable to play yourself in a movie." And I'm thinking, what are you kidding me? I'm sitting with Robert De Niro, and I'm being directed by Martin Scorsese. This is a joke.
Amazing.
This is happening to me. And so it was a very, very interesting experience that I've been talking about for more than 30 years now.
Wow. But what a special, there are certain times in our life that just really stand out. And what strikes me in this, you just kind of put yourself out there. You said it jokingly, but hey, I could play myself. And I love hearing stories like this, because I think sometimes some of us don't have as many adventures as we could have, because we don't go looking for them, or we don't, when you see something, it's like you see a shiny penny on the road and you don't stop to pick it up. And obviously you were always aware of what's the next cool thing, that I can do. So I just think that's inspiring.
I didn't really go into it with any real serious intention of getting the part of playing myself. It just sort of, I just took it one step at a time.
Yeah.
And I in fact, I can remember very clearly, talking to my wife before going for the screen test and saying, this is really kind of ridiculous. I'm going to make a fool of myself. I don't know how to act. I'm going through a screen test. I said, but it's really going to be a life experience. I says, I'm going to get to meet Martin Scorsese, and I did. And you talk about a wonderful guy. I mean, he was so, he was trying to put me at ease, and he was extremely pleasant.
You want to tell her the Mook story?
So when I walk in, I thought that I was going to have a screen test with the casting director at Warner Brothers offices in Midtown Manhattan. And when I go over there, I walk in, and I'm in this huge room, almost like a cafeteria. And in the hallway, the room is filled with people. And in the hallways are filled with people. And they all look like gangsters, or women who were, girlfriends of gangsters, or who were waitresses in wise guy restaurants, and they were all being cast for the smaller parts. And so this was kind of disarming, because I was kind of nervous, because the place is just packed with all these professional actors. And so they called me after about 45 minutes or so, and it's time for me to go into this room and to do my screen test. And who's sitting there but Scorsese and the woman who was the casting director. And Scorsese must have realized that I was, no doubt, nervous. And he stands up and he goes, "I don't do nothing, Mr. Prosecutor. I don't do nothing." The mafia, wise guy accent. He didn't speak like that. He was just fooling around, And I says, "Oh, yeah, you want to know something?" I says, "You're a mook." He says, "I'm a mook, you're a mook." I says, No, you're a mook." And he starts to laugh. He says, "You know where that came from?" And I says, "Yeah, that came from the movie Mean Streets." And he says, "You watch Mean Streets?" I says, "Let me tell you a story." I said, at this point, I was the head of the Federal Organized Crime Strike Force. I had 15 lawyers on my staff, 14 lawyers on my staff and me. And I says, every Christmas Eve, we have a Mafia Film Festival in my office. And what we do is on Christmas Eve, we send out for Italian sandwiches, we get beer and wine, we bring it in, we take the afternoon off, and we watch a movie. And we vote on the movie. The first year, it was unanimous. It was Mean Streets. That was Scorsese, that was like his first movie that was popular. And the second year we voted, it was Godfather 2. The third, fourth, and fifth years, it's unanimous every time. We've watched Mean Streets every year. He goes, "You kidding me?" He was like really excited when I told him the story. And he couldn't have been any nicer. And so then he had us go through the script. I'm doing reading the script, and that's when he reaches over and he says, "This is terrible. Give me the script." He rips it up and then says, "Just be yourself and just ad lib the way you really happened in real life." And that's how I got comfortable. He just put me at ease, and it was the same way when we shot the scenes. It's just I was telling him what the lines were. I made up the lines for the courtroom scene, and again he put me at ease and just said, "Look, we'll just work through it." And it was just great. He just knew how to deal with people, knew how to deal with, I wouldn't say he knew how to deal with me as an actor, because I wasn't an actor, but he knew how to sort of make me into an actor for the 2 days I was there, and it was a great experience.
Sheila, another
cool.
Oh, I'm sorry. Another thing I was just going to note that's somewhat unusual in the history of organized crime films. You really don't see. You saw The Godfather 2. They had the congressional hearing that Hyman Roth staged and all that. Frank Pentangeli comes in. He's going to testify. Then he doesn't. Ed really helped in the context of Goodfellas create the courtroom vibe of what a mafia trial, because you had the John Gotti trials that were kind of like that, but this was really like took you inside what a cross-examination is actually like, what the environment in the courtroom might be, and etc. And so he was there also really helping choreograph all of that for realism benefit. And there's really lots of entertaining stories even in the book, little vignettes about that. And didn't your government tie get stolen, or your government jacket? Like you had some kind of, they wanted you to dress.
Well, no, it wasn't. I didn't have a government tie or anything. I just had my own clothes. They told me to bring an extra set of clothes to the set each day, so that in case something might happen, I'd have to change my clothes. And when I went out at the end of the night for the courtroom scene, it was in a sort of rough area in Chinatown, and it was where the courthouse is. And someone had broken into the trailer where I had a room in this trailer, and they had taken my the extra set of clothes. And then I put a claim into Warner Brothers to get compensated, and they never responded. But the one I just want to mention one thing. I mean, well, two things, I guess. One is, I think that what makes this sort of we had the story about me being in the movie, which I think is a compelling story, because it's about just the average Joe. I mean, I had a very interesting job, but as far as being an actor or being in a movie, I'm just like any other person off the street. And that was just sort of somehow I found myself being directed by one of the greatest directors in history, when being in a movie with phenomenally, legendary actors. And that's, great experience. It's a great story to tell. And I tell the story of my life with Henry Hill, who was, one of the craziest, most interesting characters probably ever to walk the face of the earth. And but then I have these two very, very interesting investigations and trials that I handled. And I think what makes this different, these stories have been told before. There are books, and indeed there are movies. There's a movie about the Lufthansa robbery, and there are books about it. There's a book about the Boston College point shaving case. But what I do, I think, is tell it from the perspective of the insider. I explain step by step what I was feeling throughout the investigation, and especially the trials. The trials were very, very interesting. They were all in the front pages of the newspapers, not only in New York, but throughout the country at the time. And there was an enormous amount of pressure, but I was dealing with real characters, mafia lawyers, and I was dealing with agents who were characters, the witnesses were characters, and the judges were characters, and the mafia lawyers and people against whom I tried the cases were the things that they said and the things that they did in the courtroom were just phenomenally interesting. But one of the things I think that might be interesting to your listeners is that when I was thinking about the show and when I understand your show is and who your audience is, I said, well, are women going to be interested in this? And I'm not trying to stretch this, because in the two cases, there really are compelling dramas involving women. When I was a prosecutor, I always had a feeling that the organized crime figures, gangsters, people who are in trouble, they have a weak link. You're not going to get their accomplices to rat them out, but the weak link is the girlfriend. You can't go after the wife because there's spousal testimony, but people are either afraid. Even mafia guys can be afraid, or people who are in league with the mafia, even though they're not full-time gangsters, they're afraid. So who are they going to talk to? Well, they might talk to their wives, but they're always going to talk to the girlfriend. And they're going to want to brag to the girlfriend about what they did. And so I would, in almost all of my cases, I would look to find an angle to get to the girlfriend. So with the Lufthansa, we prosecuted the inside man, and it turned out the inside man was in the process of, he was a Lufthansa employee, and he and his wife were getting a divorce. He had a girlfriend, and I subpoenaed the girlfriend. I put the girlfriend in the grand jury, and I probably used some heavy-handed tactics, and I had her in the grand jury for 3 days, and she finally broke down, and she said, he confessed. He told me he was involved. He told me he tipped off the people, Jimmy Burke's people, and she gave a full confession. And so I called her as a witness, and it's an absolutely extraordinary set of days in which she shows up in the courtroom. She collapses. She faints. She claims that she's having a heart attack, and they take her to a hospital. The judge says she couldn't leave. This is all nonsense. The judge orders her arrested. They bring her back the next day. She collapses again, and it's a long story, but it's actually a phenomenally interesting story. And I convict him. He refuses to cooperate. Ultimately, by the time he cooperates, it's too late. The only people he could cooperate had been murdered. He could cooperate against had been murdered by Burke, and he goes to jail. He serves 8 or 9 years in prison, and goes into the witness protection program. And she's there waiting for him 9 years later. I mean, it's an absolutely compelling story.
Now that's interesting. Oh my gosh. Well, truth is stranger than fiction.
Case, the player on the Boston College team, he, we as we went through the investigation, some of the witnesses would tell us, well, the player, his girlfriend was knowledgeable about this, and she sort of unwittingly would receive phone calls from the gangsters, and they would tell her, she would say, whether the player thought that that was a good game to bet on, and they would exchange numbers. They would tell her what the point spread was and what they had to, what their margin of victory could be. So she became a sort of a go-between between the gangsters and the players, and ultimately she testified, and her testimony on the stand was just hard. I mean, this was a situation where they were engaged. They were going to be married, and and at the end, when he gets under investigation, he goes to her, and the last time she saw him before she testified, so 2 years later, he put his hands around her neck as she testified and said, "If you ever tell anybody this, I'm going to kill you." And she testified to that in court, and it was just an unbelievable scene, and the drama that's attached to her testimony and her cooperation of witnesses, just as a witness, is really a very, very interesting story. So this is not all murder, mayhem, and tales of gangsters. And I guess I was thinking in preparation for our call here, I'm thinking about other things that might interest women. And the crazy thing with Henry Hill is Henry Hill is not exactly the matinee idol, but he had such an incredible way with women. When he comes into the witness protection program, because he brings his wife and his 2 kids, he brings along his 2 sisters-in-law. Now, there were allegations that he was having an affair at the time. His wife was in her mid-30s. He was in his mid-30s. One of the sisters-in-law was about 20, and supposedly he was having an affair with her. I personally did not think that was true. But nonetheless, he wanted to bring her into the witness protection program. And so they changed their minds and said they didn't want to come. But two others who were his drug couriers, he was having affairs with these two women. He tried to bring them into the witness protection program. And we have a crazy
didn't want to go by himself.
And everywhere he went, he kept violating the rules of the witness protection program. And step after step after step, place after place after place, he ends up with a girlfriend in a matter of no time. And so when the jury is out on the Boston College point shaving case, he calls me up at home. I gave him my home number like an idiot. And he calls me, and I'm about to have dinner with my wife and little kids. They were just 3 and 4, and I think the little one was just born. He was like 6 months old. And Henry says, I'm in Nevada. I says, what are you doing in Nevada? He said, I just got married. I'm going to put Sherry on the phone. Now, he had been in Seattle, and he had met this girl, Sherry, in Seattle probably 4 weeks earlier. And he had been in New York for most of that 4 or 5 or 6 weeks at the trial. And so he's in Nevada, Carson City, Nevada, and he said, I want to put Sherry on. We just got married. She's my wife. So this woman gets on. She says, I heard all about you. And I says, put Henry back on. She says, well, I call him Marty. I said, well, put Marty back on. I said, what the hell is wrong with you? I says, you just got cross-examined. They went through every crime in the book that you committed, except for bigamy. And now you wanted to commit bigamy? He's not going to commit bigamy. Henry Hill? I'm not Henry Hill anymore. I'm Marty Lewis. And Marty Lewis got married to Sherry.
Oh, my gosh.
I says, there's something wrong with you. But he just was he's a character for the ages. He's just a remarkable character.
Oh my gosh, that is so funny. It does remind me of the movie My Blue Heaven. If anybody has never seen it,
it's based in part on that story. When
really?
The movie is based on that Ed and Henry's call. Yeah.
Oh.
I actually told the movie was written and directed by oh my God,
Ephron.
Nora Ephron. Nora Ephron was the wife of Nick Pileggi, who wrote Wise Guy and then worked the screenplay for Goodfellas. And so they actually, they lived near me, and I ran into them one day, and so I went over to they invited me over. She had 2 little kids by her first marriage, and I had my 3 kids with me. And I went over to I was with my kids. They said, come on over. They had a pool by the house, and so we were hanging around, and we just telling stories. And I told her the story about what had happened with Henry calling me and putting Sherry on the phone, and that it ultimately found its way into the movie, in My Blue Haven. But Henry there's a million stories. I can go on probably for 5 books about my experience.
Oh my gosh. Well, I think you're going to have to write more books. That's all there is to it.
We have 2 more coming. Yeah.
We're just about out of time, but I just want to ask a couple more things quickly, then I'll let you guys go. But I wanted to really quickly ask Jake. I mean, you've written these fabulous books now with Edward, and you've written all these memoirs. What made you decide, I'm not going to make stuff up? I think I can find enough just interviewing people and writing about other people's lives. How did you not end up becoming a fiction writer? And how?
Well, I'm presently 3.5 books into my hopeful fiction career, beginning 63 books in. But I have just been lucky that I'm a musician of many instruments by ear, and growing up, that's about all I did. I knew I was going into the record business. My long story short of getting into biographies was a bet with a literary publicist when I was 24. A music publicist said, you write a book, you write these press releases. They're very, and I said, if you can get me deals for Suge Knight, Death Row Records CEO, and Motley Crue's songwriter, bassist Nikki Sixx, I'll do them. And it just started going like that. And then Tupac Shakur's estate, I worked with Afeni Shakur and wrote a book about Tupac's studio process. And then I wrote with Hart and then Joe Satriani. And you mentioned Merle Haggard, Freddie Powers, Billy Corgan, and the Smashing Pumpkins. Teddy Riley's book just came out this year. So it just over 21 years before I met Ed, it had just gone that way. And the fun part of being a biographer when you get to a certain place is that you kind of get tired, without naming any names, of this classic meet your heroes, don't meet your heroes, as they will let you down, especially if they're sort of egomaniac music stars. Ed is very self-effacing by nature, but his story is that of a rock star within the mafia prosecutor community. And there's not many that you could name off your head. He's one of them. Hopefully after this book, it will be even more so. But I felt that there was just a huge amount of credit that he was due that he had not yet gotten.
Oh, I love that.
And I'm not trying to take credit in any respect because he talked with other people in the past about writing. I just got lucky the stars aligned, but I've been on a mission to just, even before I met him, I just have been thinking about this book and thinking about what a cool thing it would be. And it's blown all of my expectations out of the water. But there were so many stories here that just affirm my instinct. And I'm not saying I'm unique. Any writer would have picked up on this. And fortunately, they not only bore themselves out, but sometimes in other writing situations, you're kind of looking, we need a little more here, a little more there. In his case, we had so much that it was like the opposite way. Yeah, there were so many. He's lived such that period of the Wild West, as I call it, in the 1970s and 80s with the RICO laws and taking on the most feared mafia killers and bosses in the city. Ed not only faced down, but convicted most of them, and in some cases flipped them. We talk about, and he could tell you about this, Joe Massino. Ed, tell her would you mind telling her the boss of bosses is as closing? It's an interesting example.
Yeah, let's make that our closing's tale. And I want to make sure everybody knows where to buy the book.
I'm sorry?
Oh, just if you tell us briefly about that boss of bosses, sort of Joe Massino takedown and then representing him later. It's a fascinating little.
So I convicted I was the head of the office in 1986, and we took down Joe Massino, who was the acting boss of the McDonald crime family. He went to prison, and when he came out in the 90s, all the other bosses had already gone to prison, and I was off in private practice. And he became the most important organized crime figure in New York City. He was, they called him the boss of bosses. He was the head of one of the 5 families, but he was the most powerful boss. And the government made a case on him. And in 2002, he was convicted of 7 murders, and he was facing the death penalty. And he got word to the judge that he wanted to cooperate, but he had to do it secretly because if the government refused to take his cooperation, his lawyers, mafia lawyers, would have known that he was attempting to cooperate, and they would have ratted him out. He didn't trust his lawyers, so he asked the judge to appoint what they call shadow counsel, a secret lawyer. And the government, there was a prosecutor who was the head of organized crime at the U.S. Attorney's Office. He called me and asked me to do it. He said, "Would you be interested in doing this?" And I said, "I don't know, And he said, "Come on, nobody can do it better than you. You know these people better than anybody." And I said, "But I convicted Joe." And he says, she said, "Let's see what he wants to do." So I go over, and the judge, the prosecutor tells the judge that I convicted Joe 15 years earlier, and he says, "Oh, there's no way that Joe is ever going to accept you as his lawyer." And then all of a sudden, in comes Joe, and he's wearing an orange jumpsuit, and he has shackles on his legs and his hands. His hands are handcuffed, and he looks at me and he smiles. He goes, "Hey, it's my lucky day. I got you." And so I was when he cooperated, and I ended up representing him for probably 15 years until he died. And I can't say that I'm too proud of the fact that I got him out after serving 9 years. He only committed to killing like 20 people.
We're not going to go down
it just shows the extremely unique relationship that he had with these revered / feared people that Ed was able. They respected him. They would tell him after a trial where he convicted him, well, if it had to be anybody, sort of like that adjective, that kind of adage, because they knew that he was going to be tough, but probably fairer with them.
Yes.
In certain respects.
Well, and also earning the respect of the police and the people who enforce the laws. Guys, we're out of time, and I know some of the ladies have already said gotta go, but thank you. First of all, remember everyone, Christmas is right around the corner. I want to get this book, and even if this doesn't appeal to you, there might be a man in your life who would like to find this under the Christmas tree. So when does it, tell us the name of the book again, and when does it release?
Chasing Goodfellas, and it comes out on October 13th.
And you can pre-order it, I'm sure.
You can get the audiobook. Ed reads the audiobook personally. You can order, of course, the ebook. The hardcover will be in stores nationwide.
Fun. Very, very, very cool. This has been such a great interview, you guys. I wish we had even more time. I hope you have all just been inspired. Again, what I love when we interview people like this is these guys, I mean, like Edward didn't say, I'm going to set out to be a famous lawyer. He just did things one step at a time. He took one step at a time. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. And the same with Jake. Okay, now I'm going to do this. Okay, now I'm going to do this. And I hope that inspires us all. Let's keep putting one foot in front of the other. Let's keep, if a door opens, let's skip on through it. Let's take advantage of any opportunities that come along and really make it worth our while in life, guys. I hope you've all been inspired. Thank you again, both of you men, for hanging out with me. And if you missed the first part of this, it's going to be on my Sheila Roberts YouTube channel forever, and so you can watch it there. It'll still be hanging around on Facebook. So if you missed anything, circle back and hear some of Ed's amazing stories and how Jake got into the business of interviewing celebrities. Anyway, good night, one and all. First, saying bye to our Instagram people. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Sheila.
Been great. And one more goodbye and thank you. Don't leave me up, boys. Thanks everybody in the Facebook troop. We will hopefully be back again next week with more fun. See you later. Bye.
Bye.